Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm honored to be joined by the incredible Congresswoman from Missouri's 1st District, Congresswoman Cori Bush. Only weeks into her tenure on Capitol Hill, Cori is already shaking up the status quo, fighting for true justice and providing the critical and long overdue leadership to face the urgency of this moment. I've been looking forward to working with Cori for months, and I'm thrilled to have her here today in order to introduce this legislation with her. We also have with us other all-stars who are part of this environmental justice movement, Maribel Power and Carissa Gilman Hernandez, who will also be speaking here today. We very much appreciate all of their leadership and for all of you for joining us today. These leaders are on the ground in our communities, fighting every day to rid the disproportionate and unjust toll that the climate crisis is taking on our frontline communities. It's my honor and privilege to partner with them for a healthier and more just future. Today was an historic day for our climate movement, and particularly for climate and environmental justice. With the bold and expansive executive orders that President Biden signed into office to undo the damage of the past 4 years, the president has shown us that environmental justice will be at the heart of our nation's response to the climate crisis. President Biden has made it clear climate denialism has no place in the Oval Office. Yesterday's actions were a tremendous and hopeful start, but it was just that, a start. The coronavirus crisis has helped to expose the deep systemic and historic injustices in our communities of color and low-income neighborhoods. We have seen how the coronavirus is inextricably tied to the record high levels of pollution in neighborhoods like Chelsea, Massachusetts, where poor air quality has led to serious respiratory diseases and some of the Commonwealth's highest rates of COVID-19. And in cities and towns across the country, we see Black and brown families continue to breathe dirtier air and drink more polluted water. We know that in order to solve these systemic problems, we need systemic solutions. Now is the time for progress, the time to build on our momentum and continue our fight for racial justice, economic justice, health justice, and to ensure that we provide a justice agenda, and we have no time to waste. That is what we're coming together to do today. And I'm proud to join with Congresswoman Cori Bush to introduce the Environmental Justice Mapping and Data Collection Act of 2021. We are going to absolutely lead on these issues, and it's why we have Anthony Rogers Wright, the Director of Environmental Justice at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, with us today, why we have Maria with us today, the Associate Executive Director at Green Roots, an environmental justice organization based in Chelsea, Massachusetts. And we have Carissa, who is with us, a community empowerment organization for Dutchtown, south of St. Louis, Missouri. We are going to have a movement that is constructed all across our country with an agenda so that we create an interagency environmental justice mapping committee to identify our nation's environmental justice communities and use this information to direct investments and policymaking. As part of yesterday's climate and jobs announcements, President Biden issued an executive order that showed his commitment to developing a climate and environmental justice screening tool to identify disadvantaged communities. This bill provides the framework, the legislative mandate, and the funding necessary to execute on President Biden's goals. And it was developed in partnership with the communities and experts that understand these issues personally. We understand that the first step in taking bold and aggressive action is ensuring our ability to visualize and understand the system. We cannot solve problems if we do not know the parameters, and we cannot measure changes without data. Our legislation will launch a whole of government effort to identify communities based on demographics like race and income and public health and pollution conditions to determine who is at most risk for environmental injustices. Our bill will help to fill the data gaps that are blinding us in our fight for true justice. But our bill also focuses on the process of creating this tool. This process must lift up the voices of our communities by centering public engagement, not treating it as an afterthought. This is an opportunity to bring decision-making power into frontline communities as we work to not only create this mapping tool, but use it in our solutions for this crisis. President Biden has put forward a bold and ambitious climate agenda to kickstart a clean energy revolution in our country, create millions of good union jobs, and to center justice at the heart of decision-making. His agenda calls for at least 40% of future clean energy and climate safe investment to be directed towards impacted and frontline communities. But as the new administration looks to act on this goal, the mapping tools created by our legislation will help our government understand where exactly this funding should be allocated. Our bill will help bring power to frontline communities and help bring community members to the table where the decisions are being made. We have the opportunity to address environmental injustice in the face of this pandemic and prevent further public health dangers. Right now is the moment to pass strong environmental justice legislation to protect frontline communities and reverse decades of environmental racism. And then we need to pass a Green New Deal to transform our economy and our democracy with the ideals of justice, equity, and science entrenched in every policy that we create. This is just the beginning of the work that we have to do together, but it is a critical first step in our fight for true justice. So now I'd just like to turn it over to a great leader, my friend, Congresswoman Cori Bush, my partner in introducing this legislation today.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Congresswoman Cori Bush from Missouri's 1st District, representing St. Louis, and I am honored, absolutely honored, to be working with you, with my friend and colleague, Senator Markey. And, you know, let me just thank you for your leadership on this. Thank you for your continued leadership on this. Thank you for your mentorship on this, and for those, the work that you've done for so long. And I'm just so excited that I get to be a part of it. And within a month of, of taking, officially taking this seat. So thank you for wanting to do this work together. I absolutely appreciate you. And also honored to be working with with so many of my colleagues and leading over 30 of them on the House side in this critical legislation that makes it clear, makes it absolutely 100% clear that environmental justice is racial justice. You know, I'm so proud to also be joined by everyone on this call, especially Gilman Hernandez, someone that I've worked with in the past locally, who is the community empowerment organizer for Dutchtown South Community Corporation in St. Louis. So before I speak about this legislation, I want to introduce you to our environment in St. Louis, because our environment is just as much about the climate as it is about the world that has been built around us, that affects the air we breathe, the safety of our streets, the quality of our homes, and the prices of our energy bills. Our environment here is one where Black children in the city of St. Louis are 2.4 times more likely than white children to test positive for lead in their blood. It's an environment where Black children in St. Louis make roughly 10 times more emergency room visits for asthma each year than white children. It's one where majority Black neighborhoods experience most of the city's illegal trash dumping. It's one where Black households in St. Louis are disproportionately affected by high energy burdens. It's one where most of the city's air population sources are located in neighborhoods of color. It's one where our police department leads. Our police department leads the country in police killings again and again and again and again. A disproportionate number of which are Black people. There is a nuclear waste site, the Westlake landfill, which is a potential catastrophe waiting to happen and already happening in this community. Most of these numbers are coming from a 2019 study by Washington University in St. Louis, Sierra Club, Action St. Louis, Arch City Defenders, and Dutchtown South Community Corporation, entitled Environmental Racism in St. Louis. And I want to thank them for their deep ongoing work to keep this conversation at the forefront. I want the people of St. Louis to know that their congressperson is now fighting to secure federal funding to take their work even further. We are bringing St. Louis to the forefront because our built environment has long been understudied. We can see the consequences when people show up sick to our emergency rooms, killed by police violence, or are forced to turn to predatory payday lenders to cover their disproportionately high energy bills. But we have not been able to track or map the resources. This legislation addresses that issue. It will federally fund and create an interagency committee to develop detailed mapping down to the neighborhood of specific environmental risk factors, including air quality monitoring, which has long been understudied in St. Louis, fossil fuel infrastructure, and police violence. This data will be broken down into individual data layers so that we will know exactly which environmental hazards are affecting our communities, how they're interacting, and what the consequences are. Because that which gets measured gets done. And we need it to get done. This research will be used to strengthen and support the Biden administration's commitment to direct 40% of clean energy transition funding to the frontline communities most affected by these hazards, including many in St. Louis. This is about correcting decades, if not centuries, of injustices that have led to today's moment of environmental racism. So thank you to Senator Markey for your partnership in this fight. It's not lost on me that just 2 years ago, you partnered with one of my sisters in service on environmental justice legislation at the beginning of the 116th Congress. And today, thanks to your relentless leadership in this fight for environmental justice, we build on that work. Thank you.
Senator, I think you might be muted.
No, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Congresswoman. Thank you for your great leadership on these issues. Now we're going to hear from Maribel Power, again, the Associate Executive Director at Greenroots, an environmental justice organization based in Chelsea, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Senator. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Maribel Power, and I am originally from Nicaragua, and I am now living and working in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where I'm raising my 2 daughters. I am the Associate Executive Director of Greenroots, an environmental justice organization that for over 25 years has worked to reverse environmental racism in Chelsea and East Boston. Both Chelsea and East Boston are the epitome of what it means to be an environmental justice community. Largely low income, immigrant, people of color, and residents who experience language isolation. Our communities are home to 100% of the jet fuel that's used at Logan International Airport. 70 to 80% of the entire region's home heating fuel. 400,000 tons of road salt that are used in over 350 communities, and one of the largest produce distribution centers in the country. We have some of the highest rates of asthma hospitalization, cardiovascular disease, heart disease, obesity, and so much more. So not surprisingly, Chelsea and East Boston have also been two of the hardest hit communities by COVID in Massachusetts. Chelsea being the epicenter of the pandemic, and East Boston being the hardest hit neighborhood in the entire city of Boston. But the environmental justice attacks on our communities are not a thing of the past. We are currently fighting an electrical substation that's being proposed to go on the banks of the Chelsea Creek, next to 8 million gallons of jet fuel, adjacent to a heavily utilized playground, on a parcel of land that is not only projected to flood, but has flooded several times in the past. This is again another assault on the lives of an environmental justice community that is already overburdened. So in the absence of environmental justice legislation in our state of Massachusetts, we implore the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs and the Energy Facility Siting Board to reopen the question of need and do an independent analysis on whether this substation is truly needed. So today, we are deeply grateful to Senator Markey and Congresswoman Bush for introducing this bill that would create deep change at the federal level. The creation of an environmental justice mapping tool is essential in reversing decades and generations of environmental racism. When passed, the bill would not only require this environmental justice mapping tool, but would also determine cumulative impact and set the stage for targeted investments in our communities. This is a significant first step in reversing so much of the harm done by the prior administration. Thank you so much, Senator Markey and Congresswoman Bush, for your leadership in protecting and defending environmental justice communities.
Thank you, Maria, so much. Thank you for your great work. Thank you for partnering with Ayanna Presley and setting up air quality monitoring facilities in Chelsea. Just absolutely great work. Next, we're going to hear from Anthony Rogers Wright, the Director of Environmental Justice at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, who is with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Senator. Representative Bush, an honor to be with both of you as always. And thank you for being partners in this climate justice fight. As we've been saying, and we've already heard, environmental justice communities are not abstract entities. They're not mere talking points. They are real places with real people facing real challenges because they have been negatively prioritized to be sacrificed, extracted from, and left to succumb to a toxic legacy of dehumanization via white supremacy and environmental racism. But today, Senator Markey and Representative Bush have now provided us with a key tool for our larger climate justice arsenal. EJ communities will now be positively prioritized for investments, mitigation, and evisceration of pollution and harmful emissions. And what I really love about this bill the most is that while it's coming from the federal level, it really stands with that climate justice tenet of drawing down the resources from the feds down to the local level. And we know that this new piece of policy is going to help local policies like SB 489 in New Mexico, the ancestral lands of our soon-to-be Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, as well as states like New York, where the landmark Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act was ratified in large part due to the organizing of the 200-member New York Renews Coalition. One of the other great things about working with the sister representative, Cori Bush, is we do have a bona fide organizer in the People's House now. This is so important because this tool, this EJ mapping tool, is going to be an organizing tool that will allow environmental justice communities to be seen, to be heard, and to be at the table. And speaking of being at the table, we celebrate the policies so much, but I really do want to lift up the staffs of Senator Markey and Senator Bush, because it's not just about the policy itself, but the process that led to the policy. And these two offices have always been very, very inclusive and in alignment with the 1996 Hernandez Principles for Democratic Organizing. So I want to thank your staffs as well. I won't say them by name. They know who they are. We really, really appreciate you for always giving us a spot at the table, hearing our voices, and making sure that our wisdom and our solutions are scaled up and scaled out. This piece of policy is also going to catalyze economic recovery plans like the Thrive Agenda that was just produced by the National Green New Deal Network. And this Thrive Agenda will be the bridge to the Green New Deal that Senator Markey just spoke about, a Green New Deal that is rooted in economic, social, environmental, and racial justice. So as Sister Maria just said, after 4 long years, we can breathe a little bit easier, but we still know that some of our communities aren't breathing equitably because of legacies of toxic pollution. And now with this bill, we're going to be able to jumpstart the Biden administration's initiative of Justice 40 and get that really quickly from just being an initiative to actually being a process of getting 40% of investments to our communities, because we're not going to allow 40% to become the new 40 acres and a mule. This time we're going to get paid out. We're going to lift these communities up, and having champions like Senator Markey and Representative Cori Bush really are going to assist in that effort. So thank you both. Thank especially to your staffs. We really, really appreciate you. Let's go get this justice, y'all.
Yep. And we appreciate all your help and leadership. Historically, just such a great leader. And finally, we're going to hear from Carissa Gilman Hernandez, a community empowerment organizer for Dutchtown South in St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Senator Markey and Congresswoman Cori Bush, or as we call her in St. Louis, Cori, because she has been in the streets with us since always. Dutchtown South Community Corporation partnered up with 3 other community-driven organizations, Arch City Defender, Action St. Louis, and the Sierra Club. And with the support at the Interdisciplinary Environmental Clinic of Washington University, St. Louis, we were able to take the stories and the knowledge that we knew from experience and from what we were hearing and give numbers and data behind it. And that was how we came, that is how the environmental racism of St. Louis report came to be. It highlighted 8 different areas in which Black and Brown people within St. Louis are disproportionately affected by environmental issues. From there, we had a listening series in which we presented this information to the community directly, highlighted how coronavirus has disproportionately affected Brown and Black communities and put stressors on already failing systems. And then we just listened. We heard what community had to say. We heard the solutions they wanted to champion. And from that, we went back to the data that we, WashU, had so nicely put together, and we're able to have a condensed list of priorities and policy changes that we need to see happen here in St. Louis. But because we are community-driven organizations and we do nothing without the community, we're then going to take those policies and present them right back to the community and say, these are the policy changes that you all have recommended. Which ones do we go after first? Which ones do we drive first? And so with that, we will be able to look at our new Board of Aldermen and Mayor. We'll be able to go to our state legislators. We'll be able to talk to our Congresswoman and really push forward the solutions that our community wants to see. We're really appreciative of this legislation because this will be another tool that not only we can use, but organizers around the country who didn't have the WashU Interdisciplinary Environmental Clinic to back up the work that we were doing and may not have had the infrastructures that we did here. So we're really grateful to Senator Markey and Congresswoman Bush and everybody around the country who is doing this great work to right the wrongs that we have seen for generations upon generations. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you for your great work. So now, any questions that members of the press may have about this legislation?
I have a question. It's Anthony Brooks at WBUR. Hi, Senator. How are you?
Great, Anthony.
Good to see you. So just a general question about efforts to sort of move the progressive agenda forward, including these issues that you're talking about today, which are obviously super important. But I want to ask you specifically about reforming the filibuster and how important that is to move stuff like this forward, and whether, I know you're for it, I assume you're still for it. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important and whether President Biden's going to come along with that?
Well, this legislation is a part of an agenda that reflects the fact that the age of incrementalism is over. And the filibuster has stood in the pathway of the fundamental change, which we need in environmental justice, racial justice, economic justice in our country. And so from my perspective, it is absolutely essential that we move to repeal the filibuster. It's rooted in Jim Crow. It's now extended from voting rights and other civil rights issues of the 1950s and 60s now to environmental justice. And the fossil fuel industry has had its allies in Congress adopt the same strategy for the use of the filibuster to block real action on climate justice, environmental justice issues. So I am of the opinion that ultimately we will have to repeal the filibuster this year in order to make sure that we actually enact the historic legislation which we need. And unfortunately, it will be over the objection of those who have for too long partnered with the forces of obstructionism within our society.
Just a very quick follow-up on that. President Biden to date hasn't suggested or said specifically that he's in favor of this. Do you think he'll come along with this idea?
I believe that ultimately it's inevitable that we have to repeal the filibuster. I think it will become clear that much of the progressive agenda which President Biden is proposing will be blocked from passage unless we repeal the filibuster. And I'm afraid that that day is going to come sooner rather than later this year. And at that point, I think it's going to be clear to this administration and to Democrats in Congress that the filibuster must go, that it's just something that's rooted in a racist past and it's used today as a way of blocking the real needed progressive legislation that deals with the injustices of today and the ones that we've been talking about in this press conference.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator, this is Jason Rosenbaum, and Senator and Congresswoman, this is Jason Rosenbaum of St. Louis Public Radio. I just want to make sure I'm understanding, like describing the legislation correctly. It would basically have federal agencies create this mapping system that would point out environmental problems, especially in low-income and minority communities. Would it also require like certain amount of money to go to fix those problems, or do you think that the Biden administration can do that without it being in federal statute?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Yeah, so the legislation creates an environmental justice mapping committee led by the Environmental Protection Agency, which will be formed to identify the criteria, find the data gaps, create a data repository, and work with communities to create an interactive mapping tool based on the cumulative impacts to locate environmental justice communities. That tool is going to be essential to direct at least 40% of the funding for a clean and climate safe future into communities facing environmental injustices. That's what Joe Biden has made quite clear is his pledge as the president of the United States to ensure that 40% of the funding goes to environmental justice communities. So that's our goal, and it's completely consistent with what President Biden has laid out as his agenda. And I'm sorry, Congresswoman Bush, sorry.
No, you said it all perfectly.
Beautiful.
Hi, Senator Markey. This is Lisa Kashinsky from the Boston Herald. How are you?
Great, thank you.
I just want to ask, while we were talking, we're talking about a lot of disparities on this, and actually while we've been on this call, a press release from yourself, Senators Warren and Representative Presley about calling on Health and Human Services to address racial disparities in the vaccination strategy. I do, just while I have you on this call, want to ask you about that, especially given the botched rollout that we had in Massachusetts yesterday, where people, have been having so much trouble signing up. There's no options for people to sign up by phone, which obviously affects people with lack of access to internet, which I know is a key issue for you as well. I did, just while I have you here, want to take the opportunity to ask you about that.
Yeah, without question, there is an issue that relates to the digital divide that is impacting people's ability to be able to sign up. And that's true in the minority communities. It's true amongst older Americans as well. So equity needs to be at the heart of the vaccine rollout. And it is absolutely essential that we put in place the tools that ensure that the poorest, the most elderly who need immediate access to the vaccine are given access. And we have to modify the system in order to make sure that it's not just completely dependent upon the internet. We know that the coronavirus has disproportionately impacted Black and brown communities in the country, but we also know that's where the least access to the internet also coexists with the coronavirus crisis. So we have to deal with that issue. We have to establish methodologies that make it a guarantee that your access to the vaccine is not dependent upon your access to a computer.
Thank you. Sorry to go off topic too, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, great. And would you like to say something, Cori, about that? Oh, good, thank you.
Any other questions? Alrighty, thank you so much. Senator Markey, if you want to close it out.
Yep, it's the dawn of a new era. And as Congresswoman Bush said, you have to measure it in order to make sure that we solve the problem. And we're moving to a new era. And again, just going back to the last question, that's why we need a digital mapping for the whole country as well, so we can see who has it and who doesn't have it, so that we can rectify those broadband inequities that disproportionately harm the poorest, the most vulnerable communities of color and those in rural America. We have to correct these problems, the interrelated crises that we have in the country, and they can only be solved by thinking in those terms. So we thank everyone for joining. And I don't know, Congresswoman Bush, if you'd like to add a final word.
Sure, thank you. I just want to make sure that that it's clear that we're speaking about the environment, in the environment in which we all live. And so that is going to include, I'm so thankful for you, Senator Markey, it is going to specifically include measuring police murder. We're tackling gun violence because that is our community. When you have an environment where I just can't leave my home and go jog, when just going to jog in my own neighborhood can be, that can be a lethal thing. Sleeping in my home can be a lethal thing. That is an environmental issue that has to be addressed. And so this is the high cost of utilities, all of those things, maternal mortality, this thing. So we're looking at the environment in which we live. So I just want to make sure that the press understands that that is what we're trying to measure. What is actually happening in our communities that we have not been able to truly measure.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And that's our message. Justice is our agenda on every issue, and they're interrelated. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. Any other questions, you can call the communications team on our staffs. Thank you.